I never thought I'd find myself at 73 years old, sitting in my kitchen at dawn, heart pounding like a teenager's, waiting for the sound of tires on gravel. But that's exactly where I am. His truck pulls up at 5:30 every Saturday morning, same as it has for the past 12 years, and I'm already dressed, thermos filled, tackle box by the door. My name is Victor, and I need to tell you about Reed, about that kiss, and about how sometimes life saves its most important lessons for when you think you've learned them all. Reed moved into the cabin next to mine when he turned 58. I was 61 then, recently widowed, spending my retirement exactly how my late wife Margaret would have hated, alone and purposeless. I'd sold our house in the suburbs, couldn't stand the emptiness of those rooms without her, and bought this small place by Clearwater Lake. It wasn't much, just a 2-bedroom cabin that needed work, but it had a dock and peace and quiet, which was all I thought I wanted. The day Reed arrived, I was on my dock replacing some rotted boards. I heard his truck, an old Ford that rumbled like distant thunder, and glanced up to see him unloading boxes. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with broad shoulders that came from real work, not a gym. His hair was that salt and pepper gray that some men get lucky with, thick and slightly too long. He wore a faded denim shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and when he lifted a particularly heavy box, I noticed the way his forearms flexed. I looked away quickly, hammered my thumb, and cursed loud enough that he probably heard. He came over that evening with 2 beers and an easy smile. "Reed," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was firm and warm and lasted maybe half a second longer than necessary, or maybe I imagined that. "I'm Victor," I told him, and we stood there on my dock as the sun set, talking about nothing important, fishing and weather, and how the previous owner had let the place go to hell. His laugh was low and genuine, and when he left an hour later, I realized I'd smiled more in that 60 minutes than I had in the 6 months since Margaret's funeral. We fell into a routine without planning it. He'd knock on my door Saturday mornings, I'd have coffee ready, and we'd head out to his favorite spots on the lake. Reed knew water the way some people know music, reading the surface, understanding where the fish would be. He'd grown up in Montana, he told me, spent his childhood on rivers and lakes with his father. "Never married," he said one morning, about a month into our friendship. Came close once, but it didn't work out. He said it casually, but I caught something in his voice, an old hurt he'd learned to carry. I didn't ask for details. I talked about Margaret instead, how we'd been married 38 years, how she'd died suddenly from an aneurysm, one moment laughing at something on television, the next moment gone. I'd never be whole again, I told him. Reed was quiet for a long time, then said, "Maybe whole looks different than we think it does." I didn't understand what he meant then. That first year, we were just neighbors who fished together. I looked forward to Saturdays with an intensity that surprised me. Found myself thinking about things I wanted to tell him, stories I wanted to share. He had this way of listening, really listening, his eyes on yours, like what you were saying mattered. When I talked, he'd nod slowly, and I felt heard in a way I couldn't remember feeling before. The second year, something shifted. We started having dinner together, trading off cooking duties. He made this incredible chili that he'd simmer all day, and I'd make my mother's pot roast recipe. We'd eat on his porch or mine, depending on the weather, talking until the mosquitoes drove us inside, and then we'd talk some more. He told me about his career as a carpenter, how he'd built houses all over the Northwest, how he'd saved every penny to buy his cabin outright. I told him about my years as an accountant, how Margaret had been a teacher, how we'd never had children, though we'd wanted them. One night, after too much whiskey, I told him something I'd never told anyone. I said that sometimes I felt like I'd lived my whole life in black and white, going through the motions, being who I was supposed to be. I loved Margaret, I said quickly. I loved her deeply. But there was always this feeling, this sense that I was performing a role I'd memorized perfectly, without ever questioning if it was the right part for me. Reed looked at me for a long moment, his eyes reflecting the porch light, and said, "I know exactly what you mean." The third year, I started noticing things I shouldn't notice. The way his hands looked holding a fishing rod, confident and gentle. The sound of his voice first thing in the morning, rough with sleep. The rare times he'd touch my shoulder or my back. Casual contact that sent electricity through me. I was 64 years old, and I was developing feelings I didn't have names for, or maybe I had names for them, but wasn't ready to use them. I told myself it was just loneliness, just gratitude for companionship. I'd been married to a woman for nearly 4 decades. I'd never looked at a man that way, never even considered it. But the thoughts kept coming, uninvited and insistent. I'd lie awake at night thinking about Reed in his cabin 30 yards away, wondering what he was thinking about, wondering if he ever thought about me. One Saturday morning in our 4th year of friendship, we were out on the lake early, mist still rising from the water. Reed was quiet, more so than usual, and I asked if something was wrong. He was silent for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "Can I tell you something, Victor? Something I've never told anyone around here?" "Of course," I said, my heart suddenly pounding. He stared at the water, his jaw working like he was chewing words before speaking them. "I'm gay," he said finally, his voice steady but soft. "Have been my whole life. That woman I almost married. I really tried to be what everyone expected, but I couldn't do it to her, couldn't lie like that. So I've spent most of my life alone because in the places I've lived, being who I am wasn't exactly safe or accepted." I sat there, my fishing rod forgotten in my hands, processing this. "Thank you for telling me," I said, and meant it. "It doesn't change anything between us." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and something passed between us, some understanding I wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. After that conversation, I couldn't stop thinking. I started remembering moments from my past differently, seeing patterns I'd ignored. The way I'd admired certain men in college, told myself it was just respect. The way I'd sometimes felt distant during intimacy with Margaret, like part of me was somewhere else. The complete absence of attraction I'd felt to women after her death, which I'd attributed to grief and age. I'd built my entire adult life on assumptions I'd never examined, and now, at 65, those foundations were crumbling. I started reading things online late at night when I couldn't sleep. Stories from men who'd come out later in life, who'd lived as straight for decades before finally admitting the truth. Their words resonated in ways that frightened me. I wasn't ready to apply those labels to myself, wasn't ready to dismantle the identity I'd carried for so long, but I couldn't unknow what I was learning about myself. Reed never brought it up again, never pushed or pried, but something had changed between us, a new honesty, a new ease. We talked more openly about everything, our fears and regrets and hopes. He told me about men he'd loved and lost, about the loneliness of always hiding, always being careful. I found myself jealous of those other men, which was absurd and telling and terrifying. Year 5, 6, 7 passed. We became inseparable, the old guys who fished together, ate together, fixed things around each other's cabins. People in town assumed we were just lonely widowers, which was easier than explaining the truth, whatever that truth was. I still hadn't named my feelings, still hadn't admitted what was becoming increasingly obvious. I loved Reed, not just as a friend, but in the way I'd thought I'd only love Margaret, and it was entirely possible I'd loved him for years without letting myself know it. The fear was overwhelming sometimes. I'd be 69, 70 soon, too old to be figuring this out. What would people think? What would my late wife's family think? What would I think of myself? But then Reed would laugh at something I said, or our hands would brush reaching for the same tool, or I'd catch him looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, and none of those fears mattered compared to what I felt. Last year, when I turned 70, Reed threw me a small party, just the two of us, really, with a cake he'd baked himself that was lopsided but delicious. We sat on his porch, and he gave me a new fishing rod I'd been eyeing, expensive and beautiful. I couldn't accept it, I protested, but he insisted. "You're important to me, Victor," he said, his eyes holding mine. "More important than you probably know." I wanted to say something then, wanted to be brave, but the words stuck in my throat. This past winter was hard. Reed caught pneumonia in January, was sick for weeks. I took care of him, bringing soup and medicine, sitting by his bed reading aloud when he was too weak to talk. One night, when his fever was high and he was half delirious, he grabbed my hand and said, "I wish things were different. I wish I'd been braver when we met. I wish I'd told you how I felt." In the morning, he didn't remember saying it, and I didn't remind him, but those words echoed in my head for months. His 70th birthday was 3 weeks ago. He'd been quiet about it, mentioned it was coming up, but didn't want any fuss. I insisted we do something special, at least go out for a nice dinner, but he said no. "Just our usual Saturday fishing," he said. "That's all I want." So that's what we planned. That Saturday morning felt different from the moment I woke up. The air had that quality it gets sometimes, charged and expectant. Reed picked me up as always, but he seemed nervous, distracted. We drove to his favorite spot, a quiet cove where we'd had some of our best conversations over the years. We fished in silence for a while, not catching much, and I could feel him gathering courage for something. "Victor," he said finally, "I need to ask you something." "Anything," I said. He set down his rod and turned to face me fully, and I saw fear and hope and determination in his eyes. "I'm 70 years old today," he said. "I've spent most of my life afraid, hiding, settling for friendship when I wanted more because I thought that was all I could have. But I'm tired of being afraid. Life's too short, and I'm running out of time, to be honest." My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might break through my chest. "I'm in love with you," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I have been for years, maybe from the beginning, I don't know, and I know you were married. I know you probably don't feel the same way, but I needed to tell you. It's my birthday, and if I get one wish, it's to stop pretending, at least for today. So I'm telling you, I love you, Victor. I love you in every way a person can love another person." I couldn't speak. Tears were running down my face, which surprised me. I'd cried maybe 3 times since Margaret died, and now I couldn't stop. "I'm sorry," Reed said quickly, misreading my tears. "I shouldn't have said anything. Let's just forget it and go back to how things were." "No," I managed to say. "No, Reed, you don't understand. I'm not crying because I'm upset. I'm crying because I've been terrified to say the exact same thing to you." He went very still. "What?" "I love you too," I said, and saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff and discovering I could fly. I've been so scared, so confused. I'm 73 years old, and I'm only now figuring out who I really am, what I really want. I loved my wife, I did, but this, what I feel for you, it's different. It's like I've been seeing the world through foggy glass my whole life, and suddenly, it's clear. We sat there in the boat, both of us crying now, and Reed reached out and took my hand. His hand was warm and calloused and perfect, and I held on like I was drowning and he was solid ground. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "It's my only birthday wish." I nodded, unable to speak, and he leaned forward slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. When his lips touched mine, gentle and uncertain, Something inside me that had been locked tight for 7 decades finally opened. The kiss was soft and sweet and tasted like coffee and possibility. When we pulled apart, we were both smiling and crying and laughing all at once. We talked for hours after that, still holding hands, our fishing completely forgotten. We talked about fear and shame and all the years we'd wasted being afraid. We talked about what happens next, how we navigate this at our age, in this small town. We talked about the fact that love doesn't have an expiration date, that it's never too late to be honest, to be whole. That was 3 weeks ago. We're taking things slowly, carefully, learning how to be together in this new way. Some days it's scary, and I still have moments of doubt, of wondering if I'm betraying Margaret's memory or losing my mind. But then Reed smiles at me in that way he has, or he kisses me goodnight before heading back to his cabin, and I know this is real. This is right. This is what I've been missing my entire life without knowing it. We still fish every Saturday morning. His truck still pulls up at 5:30, and I'm still waiting by the door with my thermos and tackle box. But now, before we leave, he kisses me, and I kiss him back. And I think about how much time we wasted, and how grateful I am for the time we have left. I'm 73 years old, and I'm finally living in color. I'm finally whole. And whole looks different than I ever imagined. It looks like Reed's hand in mine, like his laughter filling my cabin, like the courage to admit that love doesn't follow the rules we think it does. It shows up when it shows up, and if we're brave enough to accept it, it changes everything. So yes, my fishing partner kissed me on his 70th birthday. He said it was his only wish. And in that moment, in that perfect, terrifying, beautiful moment, he gave me mine too. He gave me permission to finally, at long last, be exactly who I am.